This movie was Carpenter's commentary on what he saw as the excesses of the Reagan era, and the movie shares many qualities with pictures made during the Depression. It's lyrical and tough at the same time, with strong sense of community among displaced people living in makeshift homes on the outskirts of LA, and the mood is unusually sad and bitter. The science fiction element reveals itself as the story goes on. The beautiful people on TV and walking down Rodeo Drive are actually aliens, transmitting subliminal messages to the hypnotized masses, their true images visible through special glasses that are being handed out at a mission for the poor. It's one of the best films of a fine American director. Those are words from director Martin Scorsese on John Carpenter's 1988 film, They Live. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss a film in the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about They Live. So a very quick synopsis of the film is: a lone drifter stumbles upon a unique pair of sunglasses that reveal aliens are systematically gaining control of the Earth by masquerading as humans and lulling the public into submission. Tagline for the film is: you see them on the street, you watch them on TV, you might even vote for one this fall. You think they're people just like you. You're wrong. Dead wrong. The film stars Roddy Piper as Nada, Keith David as Frank, Meg Foster as Holly, George Buck Flower as Drifter, and Peter Jason as Gilbert. It's written by John Carpenter based on a short story by Ray Nelson, cinematography by Gary B. Kibbe, directed by John Carpenter, edited by Jib Gaffey and Frank E. Jimenez, music by John Carpenter and Alan Howarth, costumes by Robert Louis Bush, Robin Michael Bush, and John Melvin Young, and special effects by Scott Garcia and Jim Danforth. Today I have back on the show Nick from the Bad Movies We Love podcast, amongst other podcasts he does, but he was previously on, oddly enough, for another John Carpenter film, which is actually my favorite Carpenter. We talked about Christine, and that was a special features episode. Thanks you for coming back to chat about Carpenter and just coming back on the show in general. I'm very excited to have you.
Of course, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me back. I know that when we did Christine, that was sort of more of a one-off, like a special feature. So to be back proper for Carpenter again, very exciting.
And we're talking about one that I know you are definitely a fan of. I'm a fan of. For me, it hit harder. I'm sure we'll definitely get into that because it's even more relevant today. But before we do get into that, I have two questions for you because I do want to hear about your relationship to Carpenter. But I also, for the listeners, would love to hear about your show, Bad Movies of Love, and also if you want to talk about the other shows that you work on as well, because you're a very busy man.
Oh, thank you. So Bad Movies We Love, pretty self-explanatory. We look at movies that are generally considered to be at least frowned upon by either the majority of people or critics, but it's really more of an examination of the artistic merits of those films, and it's a mix of sometimes I run into a movie where I don't really think it's a bad movie, and we talk about it in that light. Sometimes it is a movie that we are fully aware is a really bad movie, but it still has some fun things to discuss and it's enjoyable. So been doing that now. We're in season 5. I was trying to think back because I kind of did everything in reverse, where this was all part of another show. I was kind of just brainstorming, and then the idea became more popular than what I was doing. So I was like, probably should, establish this as its own thing. So we're technically like in year 4, but season 5,
Okay.
I don't know, 160, 170 episodes. It's one of many podcasts that I do, but it has become the primary. It's the flagship now, even though it's not the original podcast on the network. But I also have the original Sheist podcast, which was sort of like movies, sports, interviews. It was just a mix of everything I wanted to do and kind of like learning how to podcast. I also
Mhm.
have X Friends, which is a animated series look at the X-Men 97 series with Seth from Movie Friends.
Mhm.
I do a show called Kunked, which is all about Philomena Kunk. I do that with Skadoosh and our producer, Jake Crawford. What else? We've got Hers, His, and Ours, which I do with my wife, which we're not diligent about. As she is working on her master's degree, we have found less time to watch the TV shows and do that. And is there another show? There might be. I don't
I
even
feel like
remember at this
maybe,
point.
but it'll come up. It'll be in the show notes. That's that's a lot, but I love that. I love the work ethic, and we know a lot of the same people, a lot of guest crossover. The big point, I love that you mentioned, sometimes the guest and yourself don't think it's a bad movie, but we know that it is.
Yeah.
And we're obviously talking about The Mask. Jim Carrey, because we know some haters of that movie, but
Yes,
they just don't get it.
a point of much contention within our
Clearly.
inner circles.
Yeah. Well, masterpiece in my mind, but we are going to talk about another great film and Carpenter's stamp on that film. And I am curious to hear how you kind of started getting into his work and if you even remember maybe what the very first of his films would have been that you watched.
It was either They Live or Christine, and I can't
Mm.
really remember because they were sort of shown to me around the same time. I think it was probably They Live first because I was a big wrestling fan as a kid. And so obviously They Live stars Roddy Piper, big in WWE or what was the WWF at the time. And my mom knew I liked wrestling. She liked Roddy. So she was like, "Hey, watch this movie, you 6-year old." Right. So at the time it came out, not at the time it came out, it was 88. So I was 4. I didn't see it in theaters or anything, but we had the VHS. I think I still have it in storage somewhere, but it was one where I don't know why she had me watch it other than that there was a wrestler in the lead role, which I mean, I guess is fair.
Mhm.
He wasn't my favorite wrestler at the time or anything, but I did have one of they were called like wrestling buddies. So it was like a pillow shaped like the wrestler and sort of printed in
Oh,
their kit. So I had one of his. But yeah, I was probably way too young to be watching this at the time that I watched it. But at that time, it probably still 1990 maybe. It was, and maybe still is, I think, a cult film. But I think the more time that goes by, the more that I think it is rightly recognized as being a great film, and I will die on that hill. I think this is a great movie.
mhm.
Yeah, I think that was probably my introduction, and then once I saw this, Christine was not too far after that, and then I started to see other stuff. Like I saw The Thing much later, I saw Halloween much later, so it was never a thing of, "Oh, this movie was made by John Carpenter." At
Yeah.
I'm seeing it at 6 years old, let me begin to shape my cinematic tastes around the world of John Carpenter, which there was plenty at the time. It was something that I came back to probably, I don't know, when I was older than 18.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I feel like I had a similar I mean, I saw They Live a little bit later in my late teens, but Christine is definitely the first one I watched. I watched it as a kid because my mom just loves Stephen King. Both my parents do. I would have watched that a lot. But, it wasn't until later on in my life that I, kind of started I knew John Carpenter and respected his work, but it wasn't until I started getting into, like, deeper stuff that I was like, "Oh, you know what? I consider myself a Carpenter fan," and haven't gone back from there's obviously some that I love more than others, but I like him also kind of as a person. He's a fun personality, We should
Yeah,
have,
for
we
sure.
need more personalities in directors.
Yeah, he is not afraid to speak his mind.
No.
I saw him calling like Cronenberg a diva or something like that
Yes.
not too long ago.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny because, all these guys that came up around the same time and he's, oh, now he's too nice to like say hi to me in a room because he's making
I
art films.
know.
He's like, go fuck yourself. So yeah, we need more of him and sort of like the Friedkin kind of personalities as
Hmm.
well that I think need to exist within the sphere. He's always
Yeah.
a interesting person to listen to. He's got a great not a commentary track, but like a featurette that's part of the Blu-ray that I rented from a local video store, which was very
Nice.
cool because I don't have a VCR. So even if I did dig the VHS tape out of storage right now, I wouldn't be able to watch it.
Yeah.
So it's like 10, 12 minutes long, maybe. But one of the cool things about the Blue is that as you go into the menu and you hover over the choices, when you sit the cursor and move to the next menu, it like crosses out the wording and puts something else. So you see like stay asleep, obey. So it's
Oh,
over the menu overlay, which was I thought a nice little touch of
touch.
detail.
I've been buying more recently a lot of the physical releases of his stuff, but I don't have They Live. And it wasn't until I was like starting the series, I was like, it's kind of insane that I don't have this. So I need to find that. It'd be nice to find that copy. I watched some featurettes because we watched also, for the first time for me, Vampires and Ghost of Mars, which were both interesting movies. But the
Yeah, love both of
featurettes,
those.
I thought they were fun. I thought they're
Yeah,
very of
they
the
are.
time, but they're a lot of fun. But the featurettes are great, and he talks about even because they were filmed in like the 90s, and he was talking about laser discs. He's like, you got to get laser discs. So I'm sure now he's probably moved on to like Blu-rays, 4K. But no, he's a great guy, and I feel like he's probably done. Maybe I don't know. I'd like to see him do at least one more, but if not, he's left us with some bangers, I'd say. So They Live, because this is going to be the opener for the series. I think it's a good one to open
All
up
right.
with.
Yeah.
I think it really explains who Carpenter is, and I know it's not a horror film. I know that's what he kind of is synonymous with, but I think he's also synonymous with sci-fi and action films, which is a point I do want to talk about in a couple seconds. But I do want to kind of open it up with reading interviews with him and watching him talk about the film. And he often describes it, especially when he's looking back on the film, he describes it as like a documentary about what is currently still happening. And it's weird because he often gets asked about this film. That's not the weird part, but he gets often asked about it, and you see him through the years, and he's just like, "Yeah, it's still relevant." And originally, it was a direct commentary on the Reagan era, and his effects on American society and how the working class were just getting poorer and the richer were getting richer, and the middle ground was becoming less of a thing. The divide was a lot larger, and I think as you and I sit here today, that sounds very relevant and familiar, and as you're watching this, through the years, that I think doesn't matter how many times you've seen it, if especially if you space out the time, it kind of, for me, it hits harder to be like, "Wow, we not only we have changed, but for the worse." How do you feel about watching something like this where it does kind of it's obviously not a documentary and it was never intended to be, but how things remain so relevant that the themes of it don't feel dated at all?
Unfortunately, not. That I think is part of the issue. But I've had this conversation with people about movies in general and what makes a great movie. And I think, this conversation probably popped up in the film club a few times, but the desire to want to slap the label of like greatness on everything that comes out now. I'm like, look, I get it. You really like the movie. It is really good. Greatness is not something that exists in the now.
Hmm.
And for me, like, great movies are movies that stand the test of time. And so to see that this movie is, 2 years away from turning 40, it looks amazing,
Yeah.
Like the quality of the visual aspect of the film is still very, very strong. And the story at the center of it is unfortunately still very timely. And I think, it's because of what the criticism was about in the film has unfortunately just continued. Like,
Mhm.
you would think that when that stuff was happening, artists like Carpenter and others would come out and make this kind of stuff, and people would, lean back the other direction. And we had it briefly, but realistically, sort of Reaganomics and the idea of trickle down economics from the top is just this thing that has been shown to just not work. And we're worse off now than we were then at the time. During Reagan's presidency is when we move away from the gold standard as a country. Since then, our, deficit here in the States has just exploded. So, unfortunately, the criticisms that are presented in this film about sort of the destruction of unions, the increase in poverty to the point where like these people living in a shanty town is like middle class in that world, or at least like very,
Yeah.
very normal. It's just like, yeah, here's our shanty town that's on the side of the hills in LA, and this is not like these are working class people, but they live in a shack. So his vision of what I think that economic system is going to populate was very, very intuitive and presented in a way that I think makes you like feel the pain of the working class, which I think has only gotten worse. But I mean, for you as a Canadian, like,
Mhm.
how do you look at this? Because this is obviously very critical of the United States. I mean, there's a line of dialogue in the movie where Nada is explaining, like, I believe in America, like, work hard, head down, and I'm gonna get my chance. And I was like, this is a weird moment that I probably wouldn't have recognized the first time, and probably in the 80s is less specific, but just because we didn't like use the terminology of like white privilege, but like he's talking to Keith David's character, and you have him being like, yeah, I'm a drifter. Like, I just walk from, place to place with my backpack and find a job, and I work a little bit, and sooner or later things are going to go my way. And he's saying this to like this black character who has moved from
Mhm.
another state. I think he's from Detroit, actually, which I mean, RoboCop is the year before this, so take from that what you will. But he's here in LA, like trying to work, and he's like, I have a family back home. And so this is like a family man, working class, but living in a shanty town. And so, like, the disparity between the beliefs of what America is in the hands of Nada versus what it is in the hands of Keith David's character is a very like precarious thought, but much more, I think, insightful and well attuned to the Americanness of it than I would have thought at 6 years old or 18 when I saw it again.
Of course, and I think it's weird because I think now it feels more of a expansive critique as opposed to just
Hmm.
America. I know there's some things that are very quintessentially American in the film, but it feels like it's not that different from what we're experiencing in Canada as well. And I think the idea that also kind of points out that things another reason why things have gotten worse because my dad growing up here, he kind of traveled across Canada selling at some point in his life encyclopedias because it was a way for him and his friends to kind of travel the country and have some sort of work. And but they didn't have a home. They were just kind of squatting in places. And nowadays, you can't do the whole drifter thing. No one's giving you a job if you don't have an address, if you don't have a bank account to do those things. It's just like you have to have these things in order to have a job. And like you said, like this little town that they live in, this, encampment, shanty town, it's kind of wild that a lot of them are waking up and being like, I'm going to my job after this and this is my home. And it's not really the case nowadays. It feels like it's a broader commentary on even not just in North America, but I'm sure a lot of parts of the world where people are just struggling, and it doesn't seem like we can see the light at the end of the tunnel really, for things to get better right now. It's a rough time, and sometimes, like, movies like this where you said movies aren't necessarily great. Sometimes you feel they're great when they come out, but I think when a movie continues to be relevant almost 40 years later, and a movie that's a science fiction movie that continues to be relevant, that's saying a lot about society, but it's also saying a lot about the people who were able to see that and capture it and put it on film for us to continue to rewatch, thankfully. But I think what also makes it relevant and what makes it easy to watch is that we get two leads. I mean, Roddy Piper is the lead, Nada's the lead, and Keith David Frank is the co-lead. But these are two guys who just look like regular guys. Now,
Yeah.
going into the movie, I'm sure in the 80s and going into it now, we know their names, but they still, as we both know, movies back then had just regular looking human beings in the movies. And they come on screen and you believe everything they're saying. You believe whatever backstory you get from Frank. And not that we don't get a backstory at all. And I think that's also fantastic that we don't know where this man came from. It's not relevant, but he walks on screen and the way they talk to each other just feels like working class guys. And I think the fact that how they go about discovering what's happening and going to solve the issue, and the fact that there's not some elaborate plan by some like genius that's happening, but it's rather like, hey, we're just going to go in with our fists and whatever guns we find to fix the problem feels like, hey, that makes sense because if, uh, you know, the average person is gonna be like, they're either just gonna give up or they're like, "I'm gonna do what I know best." And we see at some point we will have to talk about, the lengthy fight scene, but that, fists, sometimes are the best way to go about it. As you watching this film and you, again, not necessarily were a huge fan of Roddy Piper, but knew who he was going into it, how do you feel like audiences who are watching it for the first time are gonna react to characters like this? And why do you think it makes it so believable that they would navigate their path to, the ending that we get in this film?
Well, I think to your point, like you said, they are blue collar. So, I mean, both of them are swinging a pickaxe and a sledgehammer at their job. So, like, physicality is sort of built into the DNA of who they are. And so they don't know really they wouldn't know how to politic their way through this problem, right? So, get your hands on a gun and get leverage, punch a guy in the face if you need to get somewhere.
Yeah,
Like that's just kind of how they operate, and they settle their disputes with fighting as well. And it's just, the DNA of who they are. And I think, it maybe feels a little bit dated in that sense, in that the way that we get fight scenes and action characters now are all very
mhm,
slick, right? Like the John Wicks, the Equalizers, Jason Bourne. Like, I mean, that was a little bit more of a frenetic fight, but there's always like these guys are specialist type of fighters that have these very specialized fights. They're not just, you know, suplexing each other onto the concrete. So I I feel like if you're seeing this movie for the first time now, it still being relevant is gonna do it a lot of favors. I know at the time, like, Piper was not a very polished actor. Like, he's getting all of his, like, real first movie roles around this time. Hell Comes to Frogtown, By SL, this movie, they're all 88. But he had been performing and, for the most part, acting and doing a lot of physical acting for, 15 years maybe leading up to this with his wrestling career. He's a very big personality. So he wasn't afraid to be in front of a crowd. He wasn't afraid to have sort of characterizations placed upon him by the audience. And one thing I always found funny was that as a pro wrestler, to me, he always looked kind of like on the smaller side of pro wrestlers. But then in this movie, he takes his shirt off and it's like, this dude is massive.
Huge. I know.
And so it's like, okay, so like by normal person standards, this guy is huge. So the physicality that he brings, I think it's important that like he does take his shirt off in that scene because he's wearing this like he's wearing
Mhm.
fitted jeans, but he's wearing a very big flannel shirt for most of it. But I think to establish both his presence in the film and the way that Keith David's Frank interacts with him is that's the first scene is like he looks over to him shirtless for some reason at the construction site and is like, okay. And so that's like the first interaction. And so there is sort of like not like honor amongst thieves, but like an appreciation for the fact that this guy has clearly put in a lot of effort, and Piper might be sort of like the weak link when it comes to the acting side of this film, but I still think he does a commendable job. And I was sort of scratching my head like, why did Carpenter choose him? And Carpenter was a wrestling fan, and he was like,
Mhm.
Roddy's got that real like blue collar look to him. And so he gave him a chance, and we got a really good performance out of him. It's not, I don't know, like I didn't watch his entire career, so I can't say like, oh, this is the best performance of his career, but he is believable, and he feels very much like a lived in sort of person in that way. And I think the drifter aspect might help because the life of being a pro wrestler is we're on the road, 300 days a year, staying in hotels, like you're going from place to place. You don't feel like you're ever, home. And so I think making that a key tenet of who this person is helped a lot.
I agree, and I think he also puts on a great performance, and I kind of look like that he has a bit of a there's an innocence in his voice, and whether that's intentional or not, or if it's just him not fully being sure of his acting ability that comes across as innocence, but that mixed with him being a drifter and wearing the flannel shirt and the pants that he's wearing feels like he's quite obviously not from LA or
Yes,
California, at least that
correct.
area of California. 'Cause I was like, no one else in this movie is dressed like this. And I was like, do you not realize it's warm? It looks
Flannel's
like
way
it's a
too
lot
hot.
warmer. And you're wearing jeans, and those are like, back in the day, obviously jeans are made really well. So I was like, I know those jeans are warm and they're thick. He must be sweating at all times. But I love his performance, and I think that he makes it feel like you're always immediately on his side, and the innocence of just being like, "I see something happening and I'm curious," lends very well to the way he, performed in this movie.
I want to make sure that I just say how important Keith David is to this movie, because
Yes.
without him, I feel like Piper is in a lot more precarious territory. Like there's more of the movie on his shoulders, but by having Keith
Mhm,
David, who already has a relationship with Carpenter and sort of has the shorthand, he has the grit, he's got the voice, he's got the look, he's got the physicality as well to like participate in this world. And like he's actually taller than Piper, so it's like he's not dwarfed by him on screen as another actor, but the caliber of his acting, I think, really helps elevate everything, even when it maybe gets to the points where it's like at its quote unquote weakest. He is still
mhm,
there to sort of make sure that it doesn't go below a certain level. And
mhm.
it was a great choice to have him. He's an amazing actor. And, I don't know if I've ever seen him do anything where I'm like, oh man, he sucked.
I know, I agree. I think he is always very good, but I think they both helped each other a lot in this, where he was like, "I know where you're coming from, and I'm not gonna be trying to be showier in terms of, like, acting, and it feels like we're now in 2 different movies." I think he knew where to meet him, and I think physically, Piper also knew where to meet him. 'Cause, again, we'll talk about the fight scene and how they worked really well together to make that into what it was. But I do wanna talk about, because on the show, again, if you're a listener of the show, you know that I don't go through the plot in a linear way. Sometimes they don't even talk about certain scenes, but kind of talk about things as they go along and jump back and forth because, again, hopefully you've watched this movie. I think the idea of this, again, well, to track back very quickly, he got the idea, Carpenter got the idea from a comic book that he liked and that was based off of a book or a short story. And he adapted it to become, at the time, what he thought was more relevant to the 80s, ends up being, as you said, continues to be relevant. But I like the idea that, there are aliens among us trying to take over. And I think the idea that there's an outside source that is causing the huge divide between the classes. That's kind of like an easier pill to swallow for audiences a lot of the time. Because I think when people think that, oh, things are going so bad, why is this happening? And I think nowadays we're at a point where we know it's actively the government and the rich who are doing this. But I know that there was a point in my life and a point in a lot of people's life where we're like, I don't know, maybe it could be aliens. And I think this movie shows that it's obviously w it's not, it is aliens in the movies, but it's saying that it is the people among us who are doing these things. Kinda open this off by saying that he's known for his horror, but he's also known for sci-fi as well. How do you feel it blends the 2 ideas of, like, it kinda sets itself up as an action film, and then you're thrown in to now a world of sci-fi that's set within a city that we know. This is LA. We know it's LA. It's not supposed to be anything other than LA. And now there are sci-fi elements. It's not the first film to do this, obviously, but how he blends it in this film and how we know that it is, a metaphor for what's actually happening.
That is a good question. I think I need to unpack this in a couple of stages because I hadn't seen
Mhm.
this in a while, but like I was blown away this time by how just good this movie is. Like really, really impressed, I think, on every front. The way that it eases us into the story and takes a very sort of classic Western approach of like the lone gunslinger coming into the town. There's a problem that needs solving. And then layering on top of that, this political subtext, and then using the prism of this sci-fi element to really like hone in on what the story is. It's not as much of a horror film as like other movies where it's like he made a horror film, right? Uh,
Mhm.
but it treats elements of what's happening in the film, I think, as legitimately horrifying. And I feel like good satirists and those people sometimes often end up in the sci-fi realm because you can really communicate all this stuff that's you're reading between the lines of and getting to a deeper truth by doing it this way. And I think that's something that this movie does really well because it's well, on the one hand, it's like, yes, there are, of course, the conspiracy theories about like, oh, aliens crash landed in Roswell and then the government struck a deal with them for technology. And so they've been running the government ever since. Like that is a very popular conspiracy theory. The
Yeah.
Greys, whatever. I've heard many versions of this. Project Blue Book. Yes, I've been down some of these rabbit holes. But the idea that, we're seeing this told to us as like yes aliens are involved, but really like he's just using the aliens as like a point of leverage to explain to us that it's really just these other people like doing this to us, and it's really people
Yeah.
selling out. And you have like the character, the I think he's just called like Drifter. He's one of the dudes at the encampment that they run into at the donor party, and he says we all sell out every day, might as well be on the winning team. And that in and of itself, to hear that spoken now in 2026 is like,
Mhm.
okay, like this has just been going on forever, and he was very, very aware of it. And he wasn't shy in his director's commentary about like, oh yeah, I just like made the Republicans aliens. Like that's like, verbatim. He just was like, yeah, that's what I did because I was
Yeah.
confused as to why Reagan won the election. It didn't make sense to me, and like he's very anti-authority, and so
Mhm.
I think in a way, like this movie is not meant to be like here. It's going to scare you in the way that something like like Prince of Darkness is a horror movie in the way that it is designed. This, I
Yeah.
think, is an action sci-fi commentary, but then when you actually examine it, that's a much more horrifying, I think, reality because it is so close to what we are like living versus like, oh, the devil is in a jar of goo in the basement, right? Like, I mean, yes, that's scary and it's a horror theme, but that is a lot less tangible than, oh, we're all screwed because of the greed inherent in people. And that is going to, just permeate our culture for 40 years.
Yep. I know. I love a secret horror film where you're like, it's horrifying because it's true.
Carpenter's a big fan of 50s era sci-fi, and those stories were often sort of a blend of, yes, there is this sci-fi element, but there is an underlying piece of horror in that sci-fi storytelling. And so to be able to still, make a movie like that, 30, 40 years down the line from those 50 stories, I think is pretty cool as well.
I think the way the film is done, because I do want to talk about the blend of early CGI along with the practical makeup effects, because I wasn't sure, it wasn't until I had assumed that the way they made the skeletal faces was real, as opposed to nowadays, I would just know that it's CGI, but that was all real makeup, and they shot that for real on film, but there is obvious uses of CGI. Does it look dated? Fine, sure, but I also love that era of CGI because to me, it's used when it needs to be used, and
Yes.
it looks fun as opposed to just using it for the sake of using it, because most of this stuff is shot practically and on film. And I do want to give a shout out to the cinematographer Gary B. Kibbe and the special effects lead Jim Danforth. There is a great article, and I'm not going to get into all the stuff that they talk about because it's a lot of like technical jargon, and half the stuff I was like, this sounds very cool, but I don't fully know what all these these lenses you're talking about or methods. But there's an article on. There's a great if you're into cinematography or special effects. The American Cinematographer. It's a website where they, over the years and decades, they've interviewed a lot of people in the industry on their work on specific films. And I've used that website a lot over the years of doing this podcast. And there's a great article on this film and how they were able to navigate shooting between the color and the black and white scenes in this film because as we know when they put on the glasses it turns to black and white and they're shooting this on film and sometimes it's that shift is in within seconds and they wanted to have it look a specific way because it doesn't look like a lot of the black and white films of the earlier days. It has more of a there's a more of a haze going on to it, so again, I won't get into like the technical specifics of it, but I'll put that site in the show notes. And for people who are interested, I really highly recommend it. It's not like a super long article, but it's very very interesting to read. But I love the blend of all that to say, the blend of using practical and CGI. And I know you're a big action sci-fi fan of films, as am I, especially of this era. And for you, getting a film like this, I mean, just your personal thoughts on the blend of those two things in this film. How does it work for you?
Well, I love that Carpenter is such a ardent student of practical effects. He is not someone who wants to use CGI. Like if we can do it in
Hmm.
camera, we're going to do it in camera. And that's kind of a lost mindset of now where you shoot in order to have the thing done in post. And so his adherence to the skill set and the value of doing things practically goes a long way because I think even by a '80s horror makeup effects standpoint, I think it's fair to say that the facial prosthetics and stuff in this are not at the top tier of
Mhm.
the genre at that time. But they do give you a very specific look, and I think it's good enough to get the point across without being the focal point. I think if, say, there was like maybe there's one alien that they discover in the movie, right? You would maybe focus more on that one specific alien having like the right kind of looking prosthesis. But in this, it's
Mhm.
like you can tell the teeth are weird and they're like just overlapping the mouth so that there's like a black screen with the person's mouth actually moving behind it. So it's not meant to be hyper realistic, but I think the choice of the way that the face looks actually looks a lot better and creepier in black and white. And the thing I love about the black and white is that it's like a really low contrast black and white. So to your point, like
Mhm.
black and white films from the black and white era have really high uh, contrast. So the shadows are very shadowy. But Carpenter, generally speaking, as a filmmaker, is a guy he's a very good low light filmmaker. He understands shadow, he understands where he wants to have light, and he understands all of that blend. So to really tell a story that's happening almost entirely in the daytime up until like right when it has to be nighttime, sort of towards the last act, you want to have that element. So like when things switch to black and white, it reminds me of there was these things in like magazines for kids where there was like a weird printed code and you had a little like magnifying glass or like a decoder and you would hold it over that and then it would show the
Yeah.
image. And so that is always what it reminded me of. And I think it works functionally really, really well in this. And it also lends itself very well to the use of like the insert matte paintings, which
Mhm.
is, I mean, Carpenter's like, it's one of the oldest tricks in the book, but they're so well done in this as they transition between him looking at a real billboard in somewhere in downtown LA to the matte painting version of it just saying obey or stay asleep or whatever. Those like small adjustments as a filmmaker to make things easier on you, especially in the editing room and in the special effects house, really, really smart decisions there. But overall, like the way that the majority of the effects take place in the film, I think are handled fairly well. I don't really like have a problem with the aliens' faces not looking as good as other aliens' faces that I've seen in movies because that's not the point of what this movie is trying to do. It's not trying to be hyper realistic in that way.
Exactly, and I think that, again, as you said, it's not the point, but also it's wild because a lot of the imagery in this film, it has become, like, iconic, and a lot of
Yeah.
brands have used we see Obey, and we see the imagery of those aliens, so it's stuck with people, I think, because they didn't look realistic in any way. I mean, who's to say? We don't know what aliens really look
Yeah,
like,
that
maybe
is
they do look
fair.
like that. But
Maybe they
I
do.
like it.
I mean, the actors are committed to it, so it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter that much. And there was a movie recently, low budget movie called Jimmy and Stiggs that takes place all inside this guy's apartment, and the aliens are like balloons basically. Like they look like the paper mache balloons. They're done very very cheaply, but the way that the movie handles it is as if they are real, and so the rest of the movie functions well. I kind of stopped thinking about that the aliens look fake, right? Alien in 79, right? Wants the alien to look real, so the alien looks very real in that movie. But this this is a different approach to that, and it's more about the idea that the human race could have been infiltrated this entire time, more so than these people need to look a very specific type of way in order for this to work. So I love that Carpenter's like, at the end of the day, whether or not they look like real aliens doesn't actually
Mhm.
matter to the story as long as we adhere to what the core of like we want our actors to do.
And I think that's very much the point, and I love the idea that he takes a lot of small things that become a lot bigger, like the idea that he found a box of sunglasses, and that's how he is able to see it, because that's something that sounds probably on paper a little silly, that just a regular set of sunglasses would expose the world for what it is, but it turns it into something a lot bigger than what it is, and it works so well. I think if it had been like he discovered this lab or something like that, it would take you out of the story because how does that character get to that point? He's not discovering labs like that. It's a pair of sunglasses he'll put on and discover things. So I think sometimes with sci-fi, people expect or want it to be a lot more elaborate, but something as simple as that lends itself really well to the story and allows you to be along with every step that they're taking. And you don't, at least I don't question any move that they make after he finds those sunglasses.
And I mean, it comes from a place of like his self interest as well, because he first is just curious and he goes into the house and he finds a secret stash. And like my assumption is that he thinks they're worth money and he needs money.
Yeah,
So he's going to sell them or do whatever he's got to do. It really isn't coming from a place of like, I'm trying to save the world. It's more like, I believe in America. I believe in this. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to grind. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get by. And then once the curtain is pulled back, it is this like shock to the system for him where he's like, oh my God, there's so much more going on than I was willing to understand. And because now that I see this, I have to do something about it. So I think that's a very cool element. And as cool as this movie is, and like the original poster for it too, kind of like, yeah, it gives it away a little bit obviously,
mhm.
because you see the alien, but like I saw the movie like going into it as a wrestling fan. I didn't know what I was getting into. So I think the reveal for me became so much cooler because like
Yeah.
I'm here to watch this dude beat people up, you know? I had no idea really what I'm getting myself into with this movie. So I think it became much more endearing to see it handled that way. And yeah, if you're gonna watch this for the first time and you, like, don't know anything about it, that's such an awesome way to experience what this movie's doing.
Tell me about it. I'm jealous of people who
Yeah.
get to go into a movie cold, especially a movie like this. Not to shift, I don't think it's shifting gears too hard, but I think we've talked a lot about the sci-fi. I do want to get into the action part of this film and how well it's done. I think I personally love an LA set movie, and I love when a movie is very clearly LA. I know we've talked about films or just in general, if it sometimes where you're like, is this LA? Probably is, but I think this is I don't think you even have to have been to LA that you know it is. It just looks that way. And I think that lends well to it being daytime a lot of the time and the brightness to the film. And it's always funny because, as you said, with more modern action films, they are more choreographed. And I say this as scenes, obviously, in this film are choreographed. They didn't just randomly do them on the day of. But, we don't often get them outside in the daytime. I think a lot of, Hong Kong cinema, you used to get that a lot, and I think it harkens back to that, and I know that Carpenter said he's a huge fan of those movies, so I could see that a lot in this. There's a lot of great action sequences, and I do wanna very quickly after this get into that one, but there's one scene in particular that I don't know if I must have forgotten about it, but I was like, "Oh, this is really good," and, the stunt work is good. When Holly hits him over the head and he bursts through the window and rolls down the hill, I was like, "Good lord." It was
Yeah.
shot so well, like, that succession, and when the camera goes above them, I was like, "Oh, we're getting artsy here," and then when that happens, I was like, "You know what? That's good work." I love that scene. That's a fantastic scene, but there's a lot of great I don't know if you have any other scenes that, stuck out to you outside of the one that we'll chat about in terms of just the physicality and, all the people who I looked at the stunt cast list and it's long. This movie, it's very long. There's a lot of work that went into it.
What's funny about that window crash scene is that, like, Carpenter is afraid of heights, and he was like, "I didn't really, like, enjoy doing that, but, like, we had a really great stuntman," and so they showed some behind the scenes stuff, and it's a pretty big fall into, like, one of the balloon mats, like, the inflated crash
Mhm.
pads, and, that guy still really has to roll down the hill at some portion of that. Sure, he's not falling 30 feet beforehand, but we get him really rolling down the hill there, and it's edited so well that I had to like think for a second. I'm like, did he really just like fall that perfectly? Because it looks pretty well put together. I will say the other thing is that I think the movie splits between basically the one fight scene and then how much gun violence there is throughout
Yes.
the rest of the movie. And so, yes, it's an 80s action flick. Guns are very popular. We get the scene on the table where it's just like, oh my God, look at all these guns. Aren't guns cool? And I mean, that's a very American action film thing to do. And they kind of shoot indiscriminately. Even when he goes into the bank, I'm like, you're wearing these glasses that are giving you a headache. You're kind of just firing into the crowd with a shotgun. You're not going to be bullseyeing these aliens the way you think you are. I'm like, he's just going for it at that point. I'm like, okay. And at least what we see as a result is that he's, for the most part, hitting aliens and not innocent bystanders. But I thought that was funny and that the movie sort of still wanted to play in the sort of like big gun action sequences. But I think the one that like
Hmm.
maybe surprised me and impressed me the most was actually the police raid of the shantytown, because you have the chopper
Yeah.
flying overhead. And from what I read, Carpenter is a licensed helicopter pilot and does a lot of
Hmm.
the helicopter flying in his own movies. So it's quite possibly him in the chopper up there. We get the bulldozer coming in and just demolishing the town as you have all the extras and real homeless people that Carpenter fed and paid to be part of the
Hmm.
production. There's just a lot of people and timing involved, and you can't really like you really have like one shot at that because you're demolishing stuff. So I love the timing that goes into that. Plus, you have like all the squad cars with all the cops coming up, and it's like, oh, here's LAPD with their riot shields. And I mean, this is a few years before like Rodney King, and LAPD is maybe at the
Hmm.
height of its corruption around this time as well. So, as an Angelino myself, I'm like, oh, this like just feels maybe the right tone for the city, because this is it's filmed in 87, released in 88, but it's during the construction of the main centerpiece of the LA skyline. So this is like the last
Oh.
movie that gets made before the US Bank Tower is built. And so now when you see downtown LA, that's the tallest building in downtown, and all of the buildings around it sort of get shorter. So when you see that iconic like LA skyline, it is very different during the time that this film is made versus right now. So when you see any movie past this and you see the LA skyline, you're going to see the US Bank Tower. Like Independence Day is the one that it gets blown up in that. So it was very interesting to look back at LA in the late 80s before that gets built, because that is like a key milestone in sort of development efforts in downtown in LA as well. So kind of cool just to think about the era that this is getting made. And I think
Hmm.
interesting that Frank, Keith David's character, is coming from Detroit. And like I said, with RoboCop being the year before this and the way that like things were going in Detroit at the time, and then sort of carrying that over, and LA being sort of like a gritty sister city in this story to Detroit is very telling, I think.
I was looking as you were speaking at this tower because I think as an outsider, I have definitely seen that in movies, and I just never even put the two and two together that it was built later, and I don't think I'd ever even miss it. But now I'm going to actively be looking out for it in any other future LA movies. But that's why it's great to have you on. I mean, multiple reasons. It's great to have you on for an LA based movie. But no, that's really cool. I did read an article where he talked about shooting downtown LA, and someone was like, "There's no way you were able to actually shoot in those scenes because it just would have been like with the budget you had, it would have been too much." He's like, we made our way around it." Whether he's like essentially saying some of this was legal, some of this was not. But I was like, I want to be shooting in these actual areas of LA as opposed to a soundstage, and, it's translates really well in this movie because you feel the heart of the city, I think, and that grit that you don't necessarily get in I think it's for me, again, as an outsider, and maybe for yourself too, I feel like the '80s and maybe '90s era and or anything prior to like 90s, you get a different LA than you get now in movies. And
Sure.
I'm sure we don't even really get LA proper in movies anymore because I think it's really expensive probably to shoot there. But it's a lot more glamorized night post 90s era than it was. Like I'm thinking of like a Repo Man where you get something that's obviously supposed to be LA and there's that grit to it. And we don't see that anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get that. We've got Rodeo Drive and we've got that side of things around Beverly Hills where I think, sort of like from an outsider's perspective, especially when I was younger, it's like when I told people that I lived in Los Angeles, it was like, oh, like, what's Hollywood like? And I'm like, I don't live in Hollywood.
Hmm.
Like, I live in the Valley. So I'm like, I'm not really in Hollywood. And just LA County is massive. There's like 12 million people that live here in LA County. I
Wow.
think there's 4 million people that live in LA City jurisdiction. So, yeah, LA
Wow.
is huge, geographically and population wise. And, similar when we were talking about The Craft, that there is a skill in shooting in and around LA that is not just going to go to the things that people will recognize. Like how many movies have the scene of like them driving through Beverly Hills where you see the palm trees like
Yeah.
up against the sky, or how many different movies with the US Bank Tower, by the way, where you drive into the city or you're up on the top of the hill and you see that iconic LA skyline. There's a lot of different entry points around the city where like you have a very good vantage point of that. And I feel like that is just shorthand for we're in LA rather than like making a movie that's like, no, we're in LA. Like we're in the freaking fashion district and we're in the diamond district right now. We're like by the Bradbury building. We're doing all this stuff like around the city where kind of if because downtown LA has a
Hmm.
lot of like more classic architecture than some of the newer stuff in the city. And then sort of, okay, when Shaq comes to the Lakers in like 97 or 98, maybe it was 96 when he got there. But so mid 90s, you have Shaq, Lakers get successful. They build Staples Center in 1999. And then there's this huge explosion of investment in the downtown area to get people to go downtown. So now it's like high
Hmm.
rises and all that stuff. And the same thing has been happening with the Olympics and World Cup coming here. So there's been these like huge investment deals to make downtown look nicer than it
Tell
actually
me about
is.
it.
But when you see this movie, it's like this is what downtown was like. It was just like it was a place where people went to work. It wasn't a place where people went to like have a nightlife. So it's a very cool like time capsule to see the differential between like this is what LA sort of is and was like at the street level, and then here's kind of
Hmm.
what LA is like on the film side of things. Oh, we're at the beach and Santa Monica Pier, and yeah, I get it. That's all within driving distance too, so it's great. But I think those are sort
Hmm.
of shortcuts for communication.
And that's the thing with living in a city where you're like, it's the same with Toronto, where I would
Yeah.
be like, you don't need to go to Yonge and Dundas Square. I can tell you better places to go. Before we get into the second segment and just talk about what he did before and after, I do want to talk about the scene that I've been mentioning multiple times, the lengthy fight scene, because it had been a while since I'd seen it, and I guess I forgot really how long it is, but I'd read a bunch of articles leading up to rewatching it as research, and then everyone's like, that 5 minute long, and I was like, I don't know if it's that long. And watching it, it really is that long, but it's great.
It
And I
is.
think it really, if you don't know who those characters are prior to that, you really know who they are those two people who are not going to give up until they're essentially beaten into submission, and someone has to physically put the glasses on you, drag you so that you see it. And you kinda wanna yell at Frank to be like, "Hey, just give him a chance, put them on, and then go on with your day." But it's kind of funny, and it again lends to who he is as a person who is like, "I am not risking my life, my job, for someone that I barely know," even though he obviously cares about this man because he gave him out of his own pocket a week's pay, and he's like, "That's all I can do," and he doesn't really know this man. That being said, through research, that scene was not supposed to be that long, but they had kind of worked together, the 2 of them, the 2 actors, to choreograph a thing, and John Carpenter was like, "You know what? Fuck it, let's do it," and it becomes one of the more iconic scenes in the movie.
It's amazing. It might be the best fight scene ever in a movie. It's not maybe the most technical, but I think that gives it some charm. It's not the most polished because I know, like, if you're a fan of Star Wars and like the lightsaber duels, right? Like, it's not going to give you that. If you're a fan of John Wick,
Yeah.
it's not going to give you that. But most of the time, when people end up fighting on the street, like, these are not trained fighters, and it gets ugly, and they hit each other in the nuts, and then they hit each other in the nuts again. And this is something where Carpenter said on the page, he just had it written down, and the fight scene continues. And then you turn the page, and the next page was just blank and said fight scene continues. And then they rehearsed for a month and a half with the stunt choreographer, Jeff Amata. And so they were just like working on it at Carpenter's house, like choreographing the whole
Yeah.
thing. And the Jeff Amata, the coordinator, was saying that like Keith David had a boxing background, and so he had to sort of like
Mm.
make him more of a brawler. And then Piper, coming from a wrestling background, he had to sort of tone him down and make him, a little bit different as well. But they found something that worked, and it's a lot of body shots, it's a lot of grappling, it's a lot of throws. One of those suplexes on the ground would have ended the fight, though. If you're taking a guy who's 200 something pounds and lifting him up to your shoulder and dropping him on concrete, it's over at that point. You're not going to get a secondary suplex in later in that fight because that's massive head trauma. It's probably going to break your
Yes.
collarbone. Like, it's pretty bad. So the fact that there's like multiple suplexes, and I love that when Jeff Amata gets interviewed for this, who, by the way, plays like 90% of the alien characters in the movie. So like every time they needed
Oh,
one of the aliens, they're just like put him in makeup, get him in there. So he's like the cop. He's, I think, like the governor or the president on TV. He's the woman in the convenience store. He's the guy in the convenience store. I think he's the one of the two anchors on TV. He's all of them. So that was kind of funny. But he was saying, he's like, you can't just have a 7-minute long fight scene. Like, there has to be something else going on here. So they built in sort of the peaks and valleys of where it looked like one guy won and was about to walk away, and then that
yeah.
happens like 4 times, though, where you think the fight is over, and
Yes.
then it just keeps raging on. And I think, you see South Park parodies that fight between Timmy and Jimmy. They have that in the alley, and it goes on forever. Like, they just do it like scene, shot for shot, scene for scene. It's really, it permeated pop culture in a way that you wouldn't expect it to, because at the end of the day, like,
Yeah.
it's one of the least important things in terms of what the film does, but it is so just, I think, raw and violent. And I think the reason it really goes that way is because Piper as a wrestler was big on like ring psychology. And so when you're wrestling
Hmm.
and you have these matches, like, there are these ebbs and flows, and like you don't know who's going to win, and like you cheer for the one guy to win, and then maybe like he starts fighting dirty, so you boo him, and then you cheer for the other guy. And so you built in these ebbs and flows of emotion into the fight of like, oh, okay, I see this guy's point, I see this guy's point, and neither of them back down, and you sort of get a wrestling match between the two of them in the alley. It's choreographed kind of that way. And I think, there's a moment where Piper picks up a piece of wood, and he was about to hit Frank with it, and he like smashes out the back window, and he like apologizes because he's like, okay, that's going too far. Like, I really would have hurt you had I smacked you with this.
Yeah.
And then Frank tries to stab him with a broken bottle, but that doesn't work either. And so they just go back to fighting conventionally. So I like, it's self-aware enough to know that it's ridiculous while it's happening, but it's so much fun. And they really did a nice job with Piper's makeup after the fight too, because like he's
Hmm.
swollen, he's got like cotton like in his cheeks and in his lip, and so like his face is all busted and swollen, and they look like they've been in a brawl. So by the time that they check into the hotel together, you got the desk clerk really scratching his head as to what's going on.
And I think what really makes that scene, that what sells why it goes on for so long, is the friendship that we see with them beforehand. Even though leading up to that, they have some scenes together, but most of it happens after that. But they're, as you said, like closer to the top of this episode, there is some sort of like agreement that, they kind of understand where each other is coming from, even though they never met before this. And you can tell that these are two men who are not trying to actually hurt one another. They just, one wants them to stop and just go about, let's just go to our job. And the other one's like, I need you to stop and pay attention to what's going on. A lot of layers for an action sequence that you probably in other movies would just be like a scene, because you have to have an action sequence. But also it's a lot of fun and it is funny also. Um, let's move to the second segment very quickly before we get into the third one and wrap
Mhm.
up. So I just want to talk about what he does right before this and what he does right after this. So this is 1988. What he does quite literally, like he does a year before, because sometimes there's a bit of gaps in between movies, but right before this, he does Prince of Darkness. I'm going to be covering this movie in in this series, so I don't want to get too deeply into this, but essentially it's about a priest who discovers an ancient canister containing a strange liquid in an abandoned church. And he takes, with the help of a bunch of graduate students and scientists, they study it and unleash a evil force. Watching Carpenter talk about this movie and how he came about it, he calls it like his return to form
Yeah, I can see
because
that.
prior to this, he had made Starman and then Big Trouble, and then he goes on to make Prince of Darkness. I think Starman performed fairly well, but Big Trouble did not perform very well at the box office. And he was like, okay, I gotta go back to not necessarily what he knows best, but what people know him for best, because people associated him still at this point for Halloween. So Prince of Darkness was this way to get back into form. It is a straight up horror film. I enjoy it, and it makes sense for him to make a film like this, and everything about it. The score is fantastic in that movie,
Yeah, it is.
which again I'm sure I'll talk about when I do that film. But then he goes on the year after to make They Live, and it's kind of cool to see again him making a horror film and then him making action sci-fi, and just to see that these are two things that he's very good at making. Then 4 years later, we didn't really talk about this, but They Live wasn't really a big hit when it came out. I'm sure there's people who really liked it, but it wasn't, I don't think it made the money at the time that it spent, even though it was a lower budget film, but it didn't make the money back. And it, all great films do, became more of a cult status later. So there was a gap between They Live and what he does after, which is, I don't know. I don't know if you want to call it, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's a part in his career that a lot of people definitely look down on. He makes Memoirs of an Invisible Man. This is 1992. This stars Chevy Chase. It's essentially, if you've seen The Invisible Man, like the Universal horror film, it's kind of like that in the new world. But it was kind of a vanity project, sorry, for Chevy Chase, where he was very invested in this script. He really wanted to make it. At some point, Carpenter was suggested to make it, and they worked together to do it. When hearing Carpenter talk about this, he was invested in making this, and he still thinks it's a decent enough movie, but he was like, it was not marketed correctly because you have audiences who are not expecting Chevy Chase to be in a serious movie. And the tone is weird in this movie where
Yeah.
you can't tell, like, it's not a straight up comedy at all, but the way Chevy Chase performs, just because he is who he is, there is still comedy elements, even though you can tell that he's trying to be serious. This is my first time watching it. I can see why it just didn't work. I think the story would have worked had there been another lead, but you can't really tell Chevy Chase not to the project that he wanted to do. And it's funny to hear Carpenter talk about it. He's like, I love Sam Neill, but
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, I that's all I liked in that movie. It would have been better actually if Sam Neill had been the lead. I think to be honest. He would have been a lot better in that movie. I know that you because I won't be covering that, I know it's shocker, I won't be covering this one in the series. And I know you've seen it. I am curious to hear what you think about this movie.
So what's really funny is that throughout my life, I've had this recollection of Chevy Chase doing an Invisible Man movie. I did not
Yeah.
have the title correct, and I'm not sure that I ever watched it all the way through, but there was a couple scenes where I'm like, okay, I know this scene, I know this scene. Maybe I've seen it, maybe I haven't. But I think, like you said, the tone is all over the place. It is listed as like dark comedy, romance. I mean, it's technically a sci-fi film because there is like a
Yeah.
science accident that happens that causes all of this. So, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I see the strengths of Carpenter as a filmmaker. Practical work in this movie, unreal,
I
fantastic.
know.
The Chevy Chase of the movie is bad. Like just straight
Yeah.
up, he's not the right choice for this. It seems like he kind of always wants to default to the guy who we've seen in comedies, but like he can't quite shift gears to get there. But if it was his vanity project, like he's not going to not be in it. You have this story where he's being hunted by the FBI, right? And a rogue FBI agent on top of that who's like psychotic and is a lot of fun and Sam
Yeah.
Neill. And then you have him sort of doing weird gallivanting comedy type of stuff, like listening to his friends talk shit and the stuff at the beach house and that kind of stuff. So there's like these weird mixed elements, but yeah, the actual like practical effects that are used in the movie to convey the invisible man and the invisible environment, like what they did to the office building when he first turns invisible. I'm like, wow, this is top tier stuff right here. Too bad Chevy Chase is in the way of what might have been like an actually really interesting movie. Honestly, get Daryl Hannah out of there. Like, I like Daryl Hannah. This doesn't need to be a romance because there's no resolution.
No.
It's like, oh, we just have invisible babies while I go skiing. Like, what the hell is going on here at the end of this? So it ends on like a romantic comedy note, but it hasn't earned that. So I feel like if you just sort of narrow the scope a little bit and make it more about a guy who's actually invisible and he's being hunted by the FBI and that is the core of the movie rather than letting it like stretch its legs too much into these weird corners, then you probably have like what is regarded as a fairly good Invisible Man movie, but oddly enough, I like Paul Verhoeven a lot too, and we may talk about him coming up in a minute here, but he also has an Invisible Man movie that has there is like a romance angle, but it's not meant to be a key tenet of the film. That movie is also not really beloved, but I feel like handles its visual and practical effects really well and tells an interesting story about the psychology of someone who becomes invisible. So I feel like there are some really good foundational elements of a very interesting movie there, and ultimately just doesn't invest enough in the right areas. Like you put all the effort, like there's a scene at the end where she picks up his coat, but what they've done is like they cut out the segment of the coat. And so she's like pretending to pick up the invisible part. So she's
Yeah.
got the one in one hand. So it's like you're going through the trouble of keying all your actors in on this to where she's miming picking up the jacket. But then you have like kind of like the stupidness of the movie like running underneath all of it. So it's like, yeah, the craftsmanship that went into it is amazing, but the like end product is not all that great. But all things considered, as someone who really loves practical effects, I was super impressed by the way that they did a lot of that stuff. So yeah, if you like that, it's worth it. But I mean, since Chevy Chase has like proven time and time again over the last like decade or so that he's a huge asshole, I don't really like feel so bad about being like, yeah, he really sucked in this movie.
Yep. I mean, I very much agree with that. And it's always unfortunate when you know immediately what was the issue with the movie. And part of me wants to feel bad because I understand like the want to show your range, and I just don't think he unfortunately is a good enough actor to do the both
He's not.
things. And a lot of the times I was talking to Dar after I watched it because he'd seen it before, probably as a kid. And I was like, I hate when male actors think they're hotter than they actually are. Because when he was kissing Daryl Hannah, I was like, I want to call the cops because I'm afraid for you because you do not look like you're enjoying this. And it just felt gross to me. But then, like, as Carpenter does, he was like, well, that didn't work. So he goes back to what he does best. And he does In the Mouth of Madness, which I'm a huge fan of. I really love that movie. And we get Sam Neill in the lead of that movie. And
Smart.
he's very, very good.
It took the one good thing, yeah. He's like, "Hey, I like Sam
Yeah,
Neill. Let's go make a movie together and get Chevy Chase out of
exactly.
here."
That's exactly. And I think that's the greatest way to end the second segment and get into the third very quickly and just kind of wrap up our thoughts. One of the main things that I wanted to talk about, because I didn't talk about it in the top, is kind of his interest in dystopian societies that are set within the real world that we are familiar with. Because if you think about the other films that he's done, something like an Escape from New York or Escape from LA, those are cities that we know. They still look kind of like the cities. Yes, they're, torn down, what or not, but it's not like some made up country or a made up planet that they're on. These are places that we know within the year range that we know. And in this is a dystopian society. But what I love is his tackling of the fact that we are currently living in a dystopian society as working class people. The only people who can achieve utopia are those with power and riches. And that's kind of what the crux of this film is about, and something that he's tackled in multiple films. I'm wondering how you feel about that level of tackling dystopias, because I think when we hear that word, we think of something that's so outside of what we're living in, and maybe not so much nowadays because I think a lot of people are a lot more cynical, but there definitely was a point where you're like, you can remove yourself from that. And now we're like, oh, this is actually the dystopia that we're currently in. It's not something we can get to. It's we're in this currently. And I think that's what this movie shows.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of good, like, sci-fi writers and storytellers sort of frame it in the not too distant future or clearly distant future as kind of this thing of like, oh, it's a warning of like, if we don't pay attention, this is where we're headed because these are the things that I
Yeah.
see that I don't like. And if they continue to progress in that direction, we're going to end up here. Versus a story like this that is set to be contemporary, like taking all those fears and saying it's not an issue of foresight. It's an issue of this is happening now. This is something that while we the reasons that we fear that it will get to the point that it is because it's already happening. And it's happening
Hmm.
in more subtle and more sort of clandestine ways that are easier to gloss over. And it's like that thing of like this when you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And so it's like we're just ceding an inch here and there. And it doesn't seem like a large transgression. But it's 2026 and we're about to be living in like a AI fueled surveillance state. Right. So, I mean, we're already like kind of there, but think of things like social media, right? How many people just volunteer what they're doing, where they're going, what they're eating?
I
Like,
know.
I'm like, this is why I didn't like social media before the pandemic. And then it sort of became a necessity and I made friends. So I still kind of hang out there. But I'm like, I don't ever like tell anyone where I'm going or what I'm doing or like what I'm thinking. And, like I sort of value my own privacy in that way. So to see that things like Facebook and these social media like apps were sort of created with the necessity or with goal of really like mapping the human experience so that you could be more easily controlled and more easily marketed to. I think that is something that maybe like Carpenter didn't anticipate when making like this film, but I think as somebody who is very aware of the themes that are present, how like
Hmm.
consumption driven are we as a culture? Like we are very consumption driven, and unfortunately now it's like to the point where like I can't afford anything but food realistically. So I can't be that much of a consumer. I don't have hobbies the way that I used to because like I just need to eat. So I find his like view of how the stuff at the top has impoverished the people at the bottom, but the people at the bottom who are mostly in poverty are still sort of the mindset of like, I'm going to be one of the people at the top eventually. And so that is kind of a very like dystopian thought when you think of it. I think if you go back to maybe, to like the stuff that he was watching in childhood of like what their fears would be from that era is that we would be where we are now and think that we're still 30 years off from the bad thing happening, where it's like
Yeah.
we're blindly living in it. So I think that's kind of like the point that they live is making is like it's not about what's going to happen. It's about what's already happened and how much we're just giving away without asking any questions or without fighting back for the most part.
I mean, I think that was perfectly said. I don't even know what else I can add to that because I think that encompasses the the movie as a whole. We're in it, and I think it's very upfront. It's an honest way to approach a film, and I don't know that people were even expecting that from Carpenter at the time. But I think if you look back on his films, it's kind of there throughout, and you see that after this film as well. But also just from hearing him speak and who he is as a person, that he's never shied away from being like, yeah, things are not good. And I'm not personally happy about it. And I'm someone who currently has money and I do like having money. He always says that he's like, I like having money because who doesn't like to have money? But he also was aware that this is not a good world for a lot of people. And he didn't come from money. So I think he understands how you can fall into the trap of being like, I want money and I don't care how I can get it. He's like, I like money, but I still want to be the person that I am, stay true to myself, which is, I'm sure, a very difficult thing to do because I don't think anyone can really say that Carpenter is a sellout. Even with all like the things that he's done, I think that he's always stayed true to himself. And flop or not, hit or not, he is very much who he is. Again, we need more of people like that, but I know he's coming from a different era of filmmaking than
Yeah.
we are right now.
Well, he was talking about his deal that he had signed at the time with like Carol Co. and whatever the other production company was. But he was saying that like the deal was that I get to do whatever I want as long as I stay on budget. And so I was going to ask you, like, do
Mm,
you think? I mean, he's obviously had some successful films, but have any of his films actually been things that like were predicted to be big successes?
I I know from, again, hearing him speak that there's a lot of films that he thought were gonna be, and they were not. I feel like most of the time they weren't really bi I think maybe The Fog did well when it came out, but this is post-Halloween, and he talks specifically about Halloween being that turning point, obviously, and how when it first came out, that first week, it did not do well, and that there was a lot of bad reviews, but then there was one reviewer that gave it a positive, and then everyone went back to revisit it and were like, "Oh, no, this is great," and it became a huge hit. So it did end up making its money, but there's a lot of films that he was like, "Oh, I thought Big Trouble in Little China would have been a big hit," and it really wasn't. I mean, there's probably multiple reasons for that, but a lot of his stuff kind of just missed the margin of being technically successful because I think people, think of success as at least making your money back, let alone making money off of the film. But a lot of his stuff just kind of passed by, and then it made it's I think he's very much, I think when you think about cult director, even though
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
such a huge name, he is kind of like a huge part of that, of, like, things becoming a lot more successful well after they were in the cinema, and just hearing him speak, he was always just like, "Yeah, I put this out, it didn't do really well, but people seem to like it now, I guess." Like, I wish they had when it come out.
Yeah, well, I feel like good artists sort of always have their sort of finger on the pulse and they have to do the thing that they want to do at the time that they want to do it
Mhm.
and not it like it can't be about whether or not it's going to be successful because that's not the point, right? But, like, looking through his filmography, even the ones that I liked, I'm like, yeah, like, okay, like, The Thing is very well renowned, but was that at the time like, "Oh, this is gonna be a huge success," kinda thing? Like, I don't think so. Like, Halloween, yeah, I didn't think
No.
so. So, it seems like most of his stuff has actually its reputation has increased since the time that it was made, and I think that actually says a lot about him as a filmmaker because generation after generation after generation can come along and see The Thing and be like, "Oh, this guy actually really had, like, something to say and did it in a way that stuck with several generations of people."
Exactly. I was shocked to hear especially The Thing that wasn't successful at all, and it was considered a huge flop because
Yeah.
if you've ever been at a party, or maybe the parties I've gone to and you get cornered by, specifically a man is like, "Have you seen The Thing?" And he goes through the plot of The Thing, and you're like, "I've seen The Thing," but he's still going through the plot of The Thing. You're like, "Okay, well, let you do what you need to." Um, Men love The Thing. I also love The Thing, but it's definitely become a huge thing post its released. I always find it funny because it's happened to me more than once where I'm like, "Oh, cool. I guess I'm hearing about the plot of The Thing now. I guess it's that part of the party. I might need to book an Uber home." Um, Wondering before I ask you the very last question of the show, which is a double bill, if there's anything haven't spoken about that you want to mention before we wrap?
Carpenter is a musician, I think is very important,
Yes.
to his role as filmmaker and as a creative, and he's done, at least in part, every score for every film,
Mhm.
including They Live, which was a kind of interesting departure because it left some of the synthy stuff behind and went to, like, a more jazzy drum and bass line approach, but it works really well, and I feel like he's also good at using like, setting up the theme over the opening credits and making it not feel like it's just a boring kind of throwaway in the beginning,
Mhm.
and he does that really well in They Live, but to I was listening to was it, Howarth? Is that his composition partner?
Mm.
His, partner for the composition, he's like, "Yeah, John comes in and he doesn't wanna know how anything works." He's like he's not interested in any of that. He comes in and he wants to find the sound, and John was like, "Yeah, it's not my job to know any of that stuff, it's your job." So, like, he has
Fair.
a very interesting relationship with, like, how he brings the music to the project and, like, what he's looking for in how the music sets the tone for the projects, and I think being hands-on in that way connects him to the property that he's working on, and, I have a playlist that I listen to when I read, especially when I'm reading, like, horror, and every now and then it'll just be like, "Oh, John Carpenter, John Carpenter, John Carpenter," and it's like
Mhm.
the amount of music that he's made and how instrumental it's been in the I guess, like, the DNA of the film itself that you can sort of, like, separate the 2 out later on and be like, "Oh, wow, he's really, like, a very skilled and mindful composer when it comes to his films." I think that's a really, like, important element of his process. And the other thing that I would point to is just how he loves widescreen. We
Yeah.
talked earlier about him really being a guy who understands, like, low light and shadows and liking to work with shadows, and coming from a guy who really loved stuff from the '50s and was watching a lot of black and white stuff, that makes sense. But the widescreen element of it, listening to Kibbe on the special features talk about why shooting an anamorphic was so important for him, because it's like it makes movies feel bigger than they are, and it helps, like,
Mhm.
center these characters in the middle, but it gives you this really, like, great sort of panoramic view of the world that you're living in. And so how he decides to, like, frame certain shots, and, like, how you go into, like, an alley, and all of a sudden the alley, which is a very narrow space, feels huge, and it makes it feel big on screen. So his attention to detail on anamorphic, and he still thinks that that's, like, the best way to shoot film. I think it's what, 2:3:9:1. He loves it. He still, like, lives and dies by that, and I think in They Live, you see it because it is kind of like it's a B movie. It's fairly low budget, but like I said, the movie looks amazing. It doesn't feel cheap other than, like, maybe the alien makeup looks a little cheap in comparison to stuff of its time, like, including other stuff
Mhm.
that Carpenter has done in his career by that point. But, yeah, for the most part, the movie feels big and it looks really good on screen, and the shot composition changes. Like there's the scene where Piper, he has fallen out of the house on the hill, and then he is rolled into like the support struts of the other building. And so you see him laying on that incline, and then out in the background is the skyline of LA. And so he was just talking about how you can get all this stuff into one shot with using this camera lens and make it feel like this huge world when actually it's like kind of like fairly small.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you mentioned both of those things. I don't know why I forgot to add the music, and I probably would have gotten some angry people if I hadn't mentioned the music, so I'm glad that you did. I love the score for this. I just love his work in general. But I love that, like as you said, it's kind of like a more jazzy because it kind of fits that character of just being like sometimes not that he's like a bumbling idiot, but he kind of just walk around like he doesn't really know what's going on most of the time, and it kind of fits that. And I think this film again looks a lot better than it has any business looking because it doesn't need to. And I think, I don't know, I think we did a good job talking about They Live, at least our thoughts on it. I think it's a film that I'm hoping that we don't have to tell you to watch, but I think I'm hoping that we encourage you to rewatch the film if you haven't seen it, because I feel like a lot of people might listen to it and be like, I've seen it, but when's the last time you saw it? Because I think it'll hit you a lot differently with how the world that we're currently living in. But I do have one last question for you, and it's the double bill. If you're recommending They Live to someone who hasn't seen it, and you want to pair it with another film or films if you have more than one choice, what are you pairing it with, and why are you pairing those films together?
So initially, I had teased Verhoeven because obviously of RoboCop. I feel like there is a lot of connective tissue between the two in the way that it views sort of like impending sort of like financial disasters of
Mhm.
the era. But I think the more I thought about it, the more I leaned in another direction. So I'm going to go with the original Running Man from 1987. It's
Okay.
Paul Michael Glazer. This is about a public where the opiate of the masses is like TV consumption, and
Mhm.
there is an uprising of the poor and lower class that need to take over a TV station. So I feel like there is an understanding in both of the movies, and Running Man's 87 too, same time as RoboCop. So I think there's an understanding of that time in knowing like the value of the broadcast signal and how that can be used in order to sway people. And so in They Live, we see that the broadcast signal is like a metaphor. Like TV is a metaphor for like this being broadcast into the world at every level. Like there's just a frequency overlying the entire planet that makes us see things a certain way. And so it takes that, hey, TV is bad for you, and like blows it up on the biggest possible scale. In Running Man, we see it where like TV has become so perverted that we're like watching a game show that's about live executions, and because we're just like consumer driven freaks, that this is become the thing, and you people gamble on it too. So it's like now that we have
Mhm.
Polymarket and those kind of like weird gambling things where it's like, oh, is Donald Trump going to say some weird shit at his speech today, and then someone makes $26 million because he said Allah on Easter, right? And so it's like there's all this insider trading shit going on right now. So it's like just the surreal nature of kind of like both, this thing is so unrealistic that it's absurd, but also like, it's really not that far off. I
No.
feel like that's the biggest connection between the two of them. Dystopian sci-fi.
That's very good. Both of those are very good double bills with this movie, and just it kind of shows again how the mindsets were of people in the 80s, like the adults of that time, because we get a lot of movies like that. Because I have three choices. I have one main one, and I'm gonna rapid fire the other two right off the bat, and they're both 80s movies. One that's kind of similar to the one you mentioned because I thought of Videodrome,
Yeah.
Cronenberg,
Hmm.
1983, and people's way of consuming media and how it can infiltrate their mind quite literally and their bodies.
Yeah,
He
absolutely.
takes it to another level in Videodrome because he's Cronenberg. Um, but that's 1983. The other one I thought of because I thought of LA, and I also thought of the way things are marketed to people and their level of consumption. I already mentioned this, but Repo Man. And if you've seen that movie, everything that they buy in like the stores all have like a white label and it says beer or cereal. And that's kind of, the way people are being marketed to be like, this is what we're giving you. And this is what it is. And that's all you get because you need to obey. But my main choice I thought of first was a movie from the 50s, being who I am. I thought of A Face in the Crowd. It's Elia Kazan. It's 1957, and it talks about early days of the influence of media and how it has the effect on. In that movie, it's the individual himself, but it shows that it could really happen to anyone and how just a taste of power, just a taste of riches can sometimes lead you into a dark path where you end up being like the people in any of the movies that we mentioned today. And that's something that people in North America, sure, I'm sure a lot of societies have been thinking about for decades and continue to think about. I don't even think we have to think about it because it's in our faces every day. And it probably was less so. I think it was a little bit more subtle back then. Now they're just like, we don't care about you. And that's that.
Yeah, they just tell that to our faces, right? We've got 6 billionaires that go on TV and be like, "Well, you don't even deserve to eat. Like, we just want to collect your data and spy on you. And yeah, you don't deserve clean drinking water or food, and you're all going to be replaced. So yeah, we got our bunkers. Fuck y'all."
I don't even know what to say with that because that's just a fact. That's where we are.
Well,
And if technology continues to be where it is, and my daughter can hear this episode 20 years from now, I hope things are different for you. I really do. So that's I don't know. That's I want to end this on a positive note, but I feel like it'd be disingenuous to do that because I don't think Carpenter would want us to do that. I'm speaking about him like he's gone, but he's not. He's very much alive and with us, but he's a realist. And I think we are too.
like in the commentary track for this, he's like, we still haven't repudiated Reaganomics at this point.
I
Like
know.
the aliens never ended. So he's like this, despite, and there's a funny thing at the end of the movie where she sort of tells him like it's a lost cause. Like even if you destroy this, like they control the whole world, like you're just gonna slow them down. And so it is kind of like the human spirit thing of like I'm gonna fight back anyway because that's who we are and what
Yeah.
we do. And what I say on my show is if you're listening to this, you are the resistance. So I am a positive person and I am an optimistic person. And I feel like the future can be bright if we all want it and act accordingly.
Yeah. That's that's a better way to end it. I feel like we do need to some people need to start getting angry so that we can get happier in the end. That's another conversation.
It's a much longer one.
Well, Nick, I'm happy that you came on to talk about They Live, a movie that I think people do know nowadays is a lot heavier than it probably was initially perceived to be. And it's wild that this movie continues to be relevant, but it's kind of beautiful in the same way that a movie like this, that probably would have just been swept under the rug, gets to be so revered and spoken about today and continues, and I know will continue to be spoken about for decades after this. So thank you for coming on.
It was my pleasure. I don't really rate movies, like especially like not on Letterboxd, so kind of log stuff now. But I'm gonna dust off the ratings, and I'm gonna throw a 5 stars on They Live
Do it.
and represent
Do it.
while I can. I think it deserves it for its staying power and its ingenuity.
I agree. I mean, I haven't used Letterboxd in a hot minute, but I know I need to update my rating because it definitely had a larger effect on me this time. So hope to have you back on the show, and I will leave in the show notes details for all of your media that you have out in the world because I'm a huge fan, but I think that people need to, if they haven't already, listen to the shows, and it's easy for people to just click on a link instead of using the Google machine. So I'll do the work for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always nice chatting to you. It's very nice to be back and be on the show like in its full format. And yeah, I'll come back
Mhm.
whenever.
Please do. Seeing Face is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesandmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesandmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And stay tuned for our next episode on Prince of Darkness. Watch more movies, and we'll catch you next time.